Hi everyone, welcome. I'm out here in my yard preparing to check in on my outdoor worm bag version 5.0, which is now 247 days of age. Our last check-in 13 days ago was feeding number 22 for this system, and at that time we kind of contemplated the possibility of it being one of its last feedings. And then we also talked about possibly bringing it indoors at some point in the near future to avoid the cold, because we're now on the last day of November, and in my area, my region of the United States here in central New Jersey, we're already starting to feel the effects of winter closing in. There have been quite a number of chilly days with freezing temperatures, and I was starting to feel like, maybe we would bring these little guys indoors, possibly relocate them out of this bag and put them into a bus box, a bus bin from downstairs. And I assume that the material in this bag would fit into a bus box. But it did seem to me like, based on the extended forecast, to me the extended forecast used to mean 10 days out, but it does seem like they've been increasing it to 2 weeks now, and it seems like over the next 2 weeks we're going to have little periods of cool temperatures into the overnight hours where the temperatures are going to drop below freezing. But I believe on a pretty regular basis the temperatures are going to, at least during the day, remain above freezing. And speaking of freezing, I'm definitely encountering sections of this bin that are frozen. On the outer edges, it seems, we've already got frozen material. I do remember one of my first instances of sort of panicking and wanting to bring these worms that live out here in my outdoor worm bag inside was when I tried to come in here once, and I was simply unable to penetrate the material. It was just frozen over, and I think with the help of a tool I was able to chip through the frozen top surface and eventually access material in the system that was not frozen. And to my surprise, the worms were still okay. Thank goodness. I thought they had frozen, and I thought I'd lost an entire batch of poor wormies. But they somehow managed to position themselves down in the middle of the bin and protect themselves from the freezing temperatures. So it's so weird. As I probe through here, feeling how cold my fingers are, I just can't seem to feel like I might be switching back to the idea of, at some point soon, bringing these guys indoors. It did seem to me like, based on the forecast, that it would be safe to keep them out here for a little while longer, but you never know. Things can change. The weatherman's not always right. Weatherman always does seem to somehow manage to screw things up from time to time. These worms seem to be enjoying this little piece of banana peel, don't they? Sometimes I like to just position a few worms hanging out in a pile of material in front of the camera and then see what they do over the course of a couple minutes. Usually they don't like the light, so usually they're going to try to squirm out of the light and get out of view. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Over the past week or so, I think this is probably the third time now I've kind of gone through one of these switcheroos in my game plan in my worm bins. It was in a couple of my systems down in my wormery where I sort of decided I was going to backpedal on the idea of whatever it was that I was in the process of trying to do in those systems, and sort of switch gears. And here too, it does seem like we're doing much of the same, just sort of switching gears and coming up with a different game plan for the worms. And here, rather than making their next check-in a relocation from outside to inside, we're just going to stick to keeping them outdoors for just a little bit longer, because I believe that the temperatures are going to be such that they should be able to tolerate it for a little bit longer. Even though my fingers are really cold, these worms are pretty tough. And I think they can probably go a few more weeks, especially if we've got some pretty mild temperatures on the way, which we do based on the extended forecast. So I'm just going to give them enough food to tie them over a little while longer, although there do seem to be a good number of leftovers from the previous check-in. I'm definitely going to be watching the forecast to see if there's any sort of major changes on the way in terms of temperatures. Overnight temperatures dropping below freezing to me seem like something they should be able to tolerate, assuming that the temperatures during the day rise enough to compensate for those freezing temperatures. Although, you know, it is kind of interesting to see how some of the material in the system seems to have frozen, especially around the outer edges. I'm finding a good bit of the material that we threw down here as bedding during the last check-in. We had taken a piece of cardboard, corrugated cardboard, that had been always sort of our top covering, and we decided it was time to do away with it as a top covering since it was so far gone already, and it went down into the feeding area as bedding. Here we have a coffee filter, which, as you might have noticed in the beginning, there was a coffee filter resting out on the top surface, serving as sort of our feeding zone indicator, but this one was probably doing that previously, and it went in as just supplementary bedding down into the feeding area. And since this system is already, as we saw, how many is it? 247 days old now. I would say that it's probably approaching that point in time when we would probably want to stop applying bedding and just let them work down whatever remains as far as bedding type materials go. There's all kinds of paper in here. There's those few pieces of cardboard and coffee filter we saw earlier. This is, I believe, paper towel. So there's all kinds of carbon-based bedding type materials in here that we've already examined, stuff like papers and cardboards, not to mention a whole lot of leafy matter down here too. And, you know, we saw banana peels, we saw some corn cob, various bits of leftover food. Hopefully don't we end up, you know, hopefully we don't bring this system into a situation where we have sort of a food glut by adding the foods that we're going to be dropping in here for them today. I did take stuff out of the freezer perhaps an hour and a half ago in the hopes that the stuff would thaw out and become a little less jarring for these little guys. I didn't want to drop a whole bunch of frozen material on top of them, but it does seem like they're pretty hardy in terms of handling frozen material. I mean, my hands are cold, I'll admit. These little guys, I don't know how they manage, but they somehow do. But I definitely don't plan to subject them to the full force of winter at some point soon, perhaps in a few weeks or so. I guess depending on how the forecast continues to evolve over time, we'll, I believe, end up bringing them indoors. Wow, look at that. This mango seed in previous check-ins had not seemed like it was such a popular thing, and maybe it's just because the worms are looking for a warm place to take advantage of each other's body heat, or, you know, warm up a little bit. They all seem to be huddling inside of that half of a mango seed husk. And I know there was another one around here too somewhere that we probably excavated along the way as we were probing through here, but I think we're pretty much at the point where we can give them their food and restore peace and quiet. So besides all these veggies, I've also got a container of pasta, some noodles that I don't know if you could see it, but some of it is turning green here. It started getting moldy. It just ended up in the back of the refrigerator and was sort of forgotten about. So they're getting a little dose of yummy carbohydrates over here too. And that's their feeding. It's a pretty good sized feeding, considering there's a good bit of leftover stuff in here too that they can work on. So hopefully they appreciate this nice big mound of yummy foods that we're giving them. And I think we're at the point where we can just start covering up. I guess I was just curious to see if we were to work our way around, if we would encounter more frozen material. I guess this side of the container that's closer to me is the one facing south, which is the direction from which the sun shines. And then I would assume that this side, where the sun doesn't shine, it might be a little bit more frozen. I don't know, it seems to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Either way, I don't think they're going to be out here for much longer. We've definitely given them sufficient food to keep them busy for a while. I know that if the temperatures were to warm up considerably, they'd be picking up the pace on breaking some of this down, but something tells me next time we come in here, just based on the cool temperatures that they're needing to contend with out here, there's probably going to be a good bit of leftovers. And at some point, I think we will be bringing them inside, whether it's in this existing container, whether we decide to move them over into a plastic bus box. We'll just have to play that by ear and decide later. So why don't we bring a close to today's check-in. Yeah, things look pretty good in here, I gotta admit. Giving them a coffee filter that was already out here serving the function of feeding zone indicator, and it really hasn't seen a lot of action. I guess being just underneath that piece of plywood, it really doesn't have a chance to get very damp. Sometimes I even prop up this piece of plywood so that it's not resting right on the material, but perhaps we're better off pushing it down so that there's no air flow beneath it. At this point, if any little creatures come by and want to try to reach around the plywood to probe down and see if they can catch themselves a yummy worm to feast on, I think we'll just allow that to happen. In the past, I had tried to prop it up so that if any creatures do try to reach in, the distance that they have to reach is further, but at this point I think we're probably better off shielding the contents of the container from the airflow, and if there's any warmth developing in here, perhaps if the plywood is resting right on top of the material, it'll help preserve it a little bit longer. So I guess we'll have to see how the forecast plays out in future days and weeks, and make our decisions on what to do next in here based on that. But for now, that's it for the check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.